Hey, welcome to this Next Level podcast for Freedom Church. We, over the last season, we've been talking about relationships. I got our senior pastor, Pastor G, here again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, lovely jubbly, Dave. Lovely jubbly.
There you go. Lovely jubbly. If you are not British, ask someone what that means. G, we've been talking about relationships, all kinds. Parenting, friendship, romantic relationships, colleagues, church relationships. We finished up talking about something that spans across every single one of those. And it's something so essential to our church, and it's this power of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right? Relationships without forgiveness are going to run into trouble, aren't they?
Yes, they're going to be short-lived. They're going to break down. They're going to run into trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're going to have a quick conversation about this. And G, I want to ask you, how have you struggled with forgiveness? Relationships that you've been in the past. Like, what's been some of the things that's been a real wrestle for you around this thing?
Yeah, when I was obviously younger, I was less secure and trying to really discover who I was. So I would take, I think, other people's behavior, I would read and I would take maybe their words or the way they respond, I would take personal. And so I would look at them and think, did they mean this? Did they? So out of my insecurity of not knowing who I was, I would get hurt about that. And often it was around expectation. I'd have an expectation of others. So if they didn't speak to me long enough, they didn't say the right thing, or they were critical, I would automatically think they don't like me.
Right.
And in those, early years, as in my 20s, I remember struggling with such terrible feelings of rejection because I would analyze what someone said, build a big mountain into it, and then think, they don't like me and they got a problem. And that would result in hurt. And then I would avoid them. And then I'd be thinking, I think there's a problem. And it would only be if we did end up with a conversation that I'd find out that I'd built a lot of this up actually, and it wasn't factual. It was actually according to feelings, which is why we can't build these things on feelings. We go so much, well, I don't think they like me, and I think they ignored me when maybe they didn't see me. There's just so many things, and we often can just get hurt through a wrong expectation of others.
Yeah.
And how we manage. So I've learned to manage my expectations, and it actually protects your heart far more, because then I choose to think the best of people, rather than somehow thinking they're trying to have a go. And that was out of my insecurity.
Yeah. And so there's an element to which, relationships in the past, I know you talked about that in the early years of your relationship with Heather, but it would have been in church and family, all those kind of things. There's a sensitivity that can create this hyper awareness. But when it was real, when somebody had done something wrong to you and it wasn't just, say, a result, or wasn't mainly a result of that insecurity, are you somebody that's I've just always found it easy to forgive? Or are you somebody that I can forgive that really easy, or that person really easy, but this is real hard for me? What?
I think I've always found it hard, as in many people do, with people that perhaps I counted as close. So and I was surprised by their reaction, surprised by the criticism or the judgment that came.
Yeah.
That went deep. Especially with some friends, this is from years ago, and you do life with people and you open up your life and you perhaps trust, that open heart and trust, and you do life, and then suddenly something comes up. And I think you trust these friends because you've journeyed with them, and that can be family as well. It can be parents, where you have this very close, and often it is those that you've invested the most with, that you invest life with.
Yeah.
There's something you've given. There's equity on both sides. Mm-hmm. So when a situation happens and there's a blow up, there's a misunderstanding and hurt those are the situations where you have to come and realize, actually, I need to forgive, or we need to talk about this so we can move on. Because if you bury it, it's going to affect that relationship.
Yeah. And I think, when you bury it over time, it only ends up affecting you, doesn't it?
Yes, because sometimes the person might not even know. They might not have been aware they said what they did, but you did, and it hurt, and it went in. And I think it can fester like a wound. It doesn't tend to go away and heal by itself. We often find that it gets more painful because we go over and over. And that's what happens when we get a hardened heart, is it's from going over old ground. You go over the same thing that was said. And did they mean that? And then other things they say, we connect. And then we think, right, are they trying to make a point here? And actually, I just feel, that there's something on the inside that's hurting because it's not dealt with. That's why we have to deal with forgiveness, whether it's through conversation and restoration or closure. We have to deal with those things in our heart for our health.
So often we expect it to be a feeling. We expect it to, like, it's got to be something that I feel. But you've often taught that forgiveness is a choice, not a feeling. Like, how do we practice that? How do we do that? If we want to develop this lifestyle of forgiveness, but it's not always a feeling, how do we develop it?
Yeah, we are people who have our five senses. We're ruled by what we see, what we actually, our conversation, what we hear, all these things, what we feel. So our feelings, they're so powerful. And they tend to dominate our life unless we realize that God is actually saying, no, you can lead your life. Your feelings don't rule your life.
Right.
You, as in your spirit, you can actually come and you can lead your mind. And for some of us, we just let whatever thought comes into our mind, however we feel. I don't feel like connecting with people today. I don't feel like, being part of church, small group. I don't feel like that. I feel like they've got an issue. And what we do is we run around. And I think the Bible really refers to this as like a double-minded person. We're one way one day, we're up the next, down, we're sort of all over the place. But have this consistency is really us saying, no, we rule our mind. And God comes in and he said, no, you can choose and make choices around your feelings. He talks about how we can renew our minds. He talks about, you don't have to think that way. My spirit rules my mind and it refuses to let hurt camp and become a companion of mine, because that's what hurt wants to do. It wants to move in and it wants to camp out in my, in my house. But what happens is God is saying, no, you can choose to come in and decide, I am going to forgive, even though I don't feel like it. And this is where people get confused. They do it once and think, well, I've done it once and I should feel different. You might need to do it. If it's deep, you might need to be doing it for a month.
A long time.
Day after day, where every morning you get up and say, I forgive that person.
Right.
I forgive them. And what you're doing is you're declaring and you're telling your mind, you need to come into order with the way I feel. Eventually, you will feel released. You will feel, there'll come a day where you say, I feel freedom. I feel that has lifted off me. Because what's happening is your mind is coming into line with your will, and God, it will bring freedom through it.
Do you think that we've got to kind of go on the attack with forgiveness? So a lot of the time for me, I won't be conscious of an offense. For example, something comes up and it's almost like the offense comes at me, and then I'm trying to forgive from behind that shield. Whereas what you're saying is, if you're conscious of something, get up every morning and do it proactively. Speak to it, go forward with it.
Yeah, I think I've come to realize that we have this vulnerability to be hurt. So it's not like I'm surprised. Sometimes you can't always prepare for it because you don't know what comes into your world. But when I recognize that's a weakness, I go on the offense. And it's like, I can't stop it from coming into my world, but I can stop it from staying in my world. And that means that I can take action, and I can actually say, right, no, I'm going to choose to deal with this. I'm going to choose to lay this down. If it takes a few days, I'm going to choose to deal with it, though.
So good.
And I think it's this being proactive and saying, I'm not going to ignore it, because too many people I find are waiting for a feeling of, now I'm ready to forgive.
Yeah.
Almost like it's going to be a season. It's going to suddenly, I don't know, someone's going to say something and they're going to pray for you, and you're just going to feel like you can now let them go. It doesn't work generally like that. Conviction comes, maybe even through this conversation, there'll be conviction and maybe something you're holding on to, but you have to have this determination, say, no, I'm going to go on the offense, as in on the offense, about the offense, to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think it's, the Bible describes that God has given us this armor, and one of them is the shield of faith, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's actually a faith statement.
Yes.
To go on that, to proactively, for example, using your example, I wake up and I'm going to speak out the forgiveness before I feel the offense. It's actually a faith statement. So
good, Dave. That is a great analogy. So you can think about, and I'm going to lift up my shield and I'm going to say, this is a faith, because I don't feel like it, but hey, feelings don't rule my life. Do you know what? I'm going to declare this because I will be free of it.
Wow. That's so good. I mean, I think so often I look at that armor of God and I'm like, how do I put that on, God? And this is just another practical way to do it. But are there certain things that it's okay that it takes a bit longer? Or should we try and deal with things as quickly as we possibly can?
Yeah, I mentioned this when I did the message, was that hurt and pain is real. And I want people to understand that, because for me to stand up and do a message saying, God says, unless you forgive, he won't forgive you, it feels really in your face. If you've been through abuse or been through, I know we have some people in our church that have lost people through murder, and you're saying you better forgive them.
It's huge.
And I want to be sensitive about that. God understands and he knows. And when he put that in there, he knew what he was asking. At the end of the day, man took hold of Jesus and put him on a cross. He knows what it is to have a son taken and killed, and he did it for us,
Wow.
And so through this, I wanted to really, I think, encourage people that you might have a massive pain, a massive area of unforgiveness because of the terrible thing that we can't even comprehend what you went through. But God still says your freedom is in forgiveness.
Wow.
It's not making an excuse of what happened. It's like, really is. No, your freedom is through forgiveness. But I also understand that sometimes that is not as quick as, right, now you've heard the challenge, pray a prayer, you've dealt with it. Sometimes there is a process of healing that is necessary.
And it's layered, isn't it?
Yeah, it's layered, and you go through. Sometimes you can't say you got 3 days to deal with it. You've got a month. But what I would encourage you is don't you leave it and just think it's in the background, it's part of who I am. No, it's not part of who you are.
Right.
The enemy tried to attach it to you. And again, you've got to go on the offense, with the hurt. You've got to go to business. You've got to pick up your shield of faith to say, you will not have me. You've robbed certain parts of my life, but you will not rob more. And you've got to go on the offense. And as long as you're facing the right direction of forgiveness, that this is your decision. And every day you are making a statement. And I would say it does need to be every day till you overcome it.
Right.
Where you are saying, I do forgive that person. I don't feel like it, but I forgive. You've got to go through that. You've got it, and that could be a process, but God will lead you through it and minister and sustain you through it. But I just wanted people to understand that there's some big stuff, some big hurt, situations that have gone on, and God doesn't just look and take that lightly, but he says, come on, keep taking steps. You are further away from where you were, and you're heading out of the prison door.
Yeah, and I think so often, one of the things we can fear is that forgiveness is compliance. How do we walk that balance of, we have to forgive, but we also have to account and, almost say, no, that's not right. How do we walk that balance as a Christian? Yeah,
often with, I think, the Christian faith, I've heard people do things like, well, I've just got to grin and bear it. I've got to, I've just got to forgive. I don't want people hearing this message around forgiveness, that I've just got to put up with the situation and, maybe it's to do with humility. No, that's false. Humility is really knowing who we are under God. And we are actually, we have this great value, and that he has purpose in who we are. So if there's value attached to us, we've got to have that value about who we are. And if you're in a situation where perhaps you're married to someone and they are abusive, we would say that you need to do something about that. God doesn't expect you to put your head down and
just forgive.
Forgive and then forgive again, and they just treat you like rubbish. Say, no, get some help. God, believe first of all for restoration, for help. But ultimately, if there is physical abuse or even mental abuse going on, maybe you have to leave that situation.
Right.
I know this is a bit controversial for, the church and pastors, but I don't believe God is expecting someone to stay in an abusive situation when the other person is not willing to change. Because he wants you to find, he values you, you're precious, and being in that place is just like breaking you down.
God is a God of justice.
Yes.
It's not something he does, it's something that he is. So, we are absolutely about justice and the right thing happening, but there is also then that thing of forgiveness along the journey as well.
And if there's been perhaps abuse that's gone on, within perhaps when you were younger, there is also something about, forgiveness is your way out of the prison. You don't want to be held by that. But we also believe in justice. And if that person is still, if they've broken the law, and if they are still, there's possibly they could still be doing the same thing to others, then we would be saying, look, there's a responsibility there. It's not, let's forgive and we're going to be this mushy like Christians. There is also this level of justice and responsibility that we have to see God's best for people.
Absolutely. Obviously, like some of this stuff we're talking about is huge, like deep, personal. And often I think one of the things is it can be quite easy to forgive internally, like on our own, but then we have to keep doing life with that person or those people. And actually, in order for forgiveness to do its full work, sometimes there needs to be conversations in relationships. How do we do that in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think for many of the very serious ones that we've mentioned, some of those things, forgiveness is the only closure that we can get. It's not going to perhaps be a conversation with an abuser, or it is going to be forgiveness and maybe some action. But I think what we're talking about here, though, it probably fills 95% of the other hurts. It's almost everyday life and journeying, and people promised this and they let us down, and we felt this leadership of the church, mistreated us, and I don't know, family members, and there was betrayal, and people perhaps going through divorce, etc. Those things that it's massive.
Yeah,
so not belittling those things, but there is we're just people that pick up offense and hurt very easily, and we can't just walk away from those things. You don't just want to say, right, failed, let's now walk into another relationship. No, there are key relationships, and this is why it's important for the church, and it's important for family. Any relationship you value, you will need to have forgiveness at the heart of it, because if they haven't yet, it won't be long before perhaps they let you down.
Yeah,
there's something hurtful, there's something happens, and you're going to need to exercise forgiveness. And sometimes that requires a conversation, because through conversation is how we learn and we grow and manage to grow this relationship into an even greater place. So it means we have to talk. And the first thing is, if you're going to do that, you need to choose the time and the place of your conversation.
Right.
So if there is hurt, within a marriage or friendship, let's just think of marriage first of all, and you have children. Choose the time wisely. Don't do it on the back of everything kicking off at home and you've got hurt and something's been said. You're going to have a blazing row. You got to choose a time where there is an element of peace that you can say, look, let's sit down. Don't hijack the other person.
Good.
Maybe it's something like, I think it'd be really good if we just talk about that.
Yeah.
And let's come being calm about it, to want to find a reconciliation and move forward. I think that's really important. Also, we need to always attack the issue and not each other. I think
that's
when we
huge.
come to those things, we want to, and Dave, I know that you preached on being back to back. If you're married, let's fight back to back about some of these. It's actually about what's happening outside sometimes that brings hurt, not actually about us.
Yeah.
And we've got to identify it so that we can fight together in that. Also, let's be responsive over things and not just react at the wrong time because we're sensitive. Communication is a skill that you develop. So if you're young, perhaps married, you're going to have to learn to develop it. You do it by practicing it. And sometimes you'll do well and other times you'll fail, but you've got to keep developing it. It's so important. I would also be slow to speak and wise with your words, because often when you're trying to reconcile this hurt involved, we love to put our side over. We love to put it's like, yeah, well, you did this and this is how I felt. Sometimes we can be so busy trying to prove that we're right, but we can be very wrong in the way we do it.
I think, one of those things in these, how to have these conversations healthy is you've also got to learn how to receive forgiveness. Yes. As well as give it, because actually there's going to be times where you have wronged somebody. And I think that thing of sometimes, you don't always take it. Sometimes you do have to rebuff. But actually, when someone's coming to do that with the right thing, there's such a power in owning it. And, this is something I've seen people do. It's like, oh, well, I'm really sorry if you felt that way about this. That's not an apology.
Classic.
That's not owning or saying, that's not actually saying sorry. That's basically saying, I'm sorry for you that you reacted like that. Owning it is going, I'm really sorry for doing that thing.
Yes,
Like,
Dave.
this
And
is
that's so good because
completely different.
again, we hear people challenged by, yeah, actually, I was hurt. So I'm going to go to someone and tell them how they hurt me, although you got the offense, and then you go, but I forgive you. And it leaves them, it can create damage because it's like, I've offloaded, I've told you how you let me down. But sometimes you just need wisdom around that because you need to be going, take responsibility and saying, actually, will you forgive me?
Yeah.
Because that's what the Bible says, is you got no right to hold that. But when we talk about these things, we got to be so careful, and sorry is powerful. It's like sorry is a healing word.
Yeah,
Often
come
we're
on.
just trying to prove our point and we want to almost come out on top. But that's not the way God teaches us. Sorry is a powerful word. And if we can really use this to sort of come in and have an honest conversation, but not at the expense of hurting someone, because I think
so
that,
powerful.
it's just being honest. You need to hear the truth. No, actually, the truth can be damaging if you hold it in the wrong way. But if it's about building, and you come out of that conversation where you're both built up, not about you being built up, well, I feel much better. Now I've, discharged that, I feel much better. But you look at the other person, if you haven't come, and this is about relationship, if you haven't built that relationship up, so you both walk away and there's forgiveness,
So true.
you've built it up, sometimes you don't need to say all the things. That's what I've learned. Sometimes it doesn't really matter. It's like forgiveness actually trumps it because you're going to trust them again. And maybe you'll have to visit again, but God is saying, keep like an open heart, keep a heart that trusts, because that's how you build great relationships, but also have that tough skin.
We talk about this all the time. You've rightly kind of like put this in our church, but so much of our life comes down to vision. And, when it comes to forgiveness, and operating with forgiveness in life, what's the kind of vision that you have for our relationships?
I think in the first 10 years, Heather and I didn't really have a vision around hurt because we never anticipated that we would experience some of the hurt and the rejection, the pain that we did. So we were naive.
Do you mean in church life now, or your own marriage, or?
I think in all life, church.
In everything.
Yeah, in everything,
Yeah.
because it comes at you from all different angles. And I think in the first few years, Heather and I learned very quickly to stand together. But then you're going to have, particularly when you're building church, you're going to have an experience, disappointment, rejection, criticism, all these things. And in a way, we were perhaps open targets in those first 10 years. It was like, wow, what is this? I didn't know that people could be like this because we were naive. But then we came to a place where God said, you can't change the way other people respond, but you can change the way you respond.
Come on.
And he said, you got to get vision around living like, a life free of offense.
Right.
So we decided, we're about 30 years old, and we decided we commit to live an offense-free life.
Wow.
And there's something in both of us. We'll always come back to this, whether it's weekly or say something creeps in. It can be, we'll just say, yeah, but we've decided and we committed to live an offense-free life. That means we will deal with offense. You can't stop it coming in. And the example I use is over here in the UK, summertime, we have this grass with little like sticky balls on. And if you walk through there with, say, your trousers on, they'll stick to you. These little balls, they stick on you and you have to pull them up after because they've got these little hooks. And I see that as offense. Right. Walking through life, it's going to try and stick to you. It's not if, it will try and stick to you. But you have a choice to get through the grass, get through the day, and then say, let's just pull that off.
Come on.
Let's pull that one off.
So good.
Oh, I don't want that. I recognize it. Pull it off. And we have the choice to pull it away and live an offense-free life. This is his plan for us. This is like the vision we decided to follow. And it comes out of a flow of forgiveness that comes from the cross. Because we recognize that everything we have, that we're able to live in forgiveness because of what Christ did on the cross through forgiveness.
Right.
So what it's doing is it's flowing from God through Christ, through the cross, into our life so that we allow it to flow out from us into others.
Man.
Not as a reservoir, because it doesn't work that way. It's like it's got to flow out. It's got to flow. So when it comes, right, we see it, but we forgive. We've committed to live an offense-free life. And this is a key for every one of us to live a life of abundance.
Come on.
This is the way that you can live life to its fullness and see the best relationships ever.
It's so good. It's so, so good. So this week, today, this season, whatever time you're listening to this, how are you going to build that offense-free life? How are you going to engage in this forgiveness? We encourage you to action something today. It's all well and good listening to a podcast, all well and good, hearing something that's impactful, but the key is to action it tomorrow, because this will change nations, legacies, and generations.
Yeah, there's so much more beyond your decision. And I encourage you, if you've been listening to this and maybe it's painful and, you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this. You can because Christ is in you.
Come on.
If you're a believer, there is something about the power of Christ, the essence of grace and forgiveness, who he is, that is in you. And you have the ability to get free from that offense and forgiveness, because out of that, you walk out of the prison door. Out of that, you live a bigger life. And there are people beyond that decision that are waiting for you. And that's why you need to live a life of forgiveness.
Come on. Let's do it. Let's be people. Walk out of the prison.